The city of Chicago is bracing itself for a wave of protests as the Democratic National Convention kicks off. Thousands of activists have descended upon the city, ready to make their voices heard on a multitude of issues. From economic inequality to reproductive rights, the protesters represent a broad spectrum of concerns that have galvanized the nation. The DNC, a symbol of American democracy, has become a lightning rod for dissent, attracting those who feel unheard and unseen. As the convention unfolds, all eyes are on Chicago, where the battle for the soul of the Democratic Party is playing out on the streets. The selection of Chicago as the host city for the DNC is not without its historical significance. The city, forever marked by the tumultuous 1968 Democratic National Convention, carries the weight of past protests against the Vietnam War. This year, the echoes of that turbulent summer resonate once again as a new generation takes to the streets, fueled by their own set of grievances. The stage is set for a showdown between the establishment and the grassroots, a test of the Democratic Party's commitment to its core values. The convergence of so many activist groups in Chicago has created an atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty. The city, known for its history of labor activism and social justice movements, is no stranger to protests. However, the scale and intensity of the planned demonstrations have put both city officials and law enforcement agencies on high alert. The specter of violence, a haunting reminder of the 1968 convention, looms large, adding another layer of complexity to an already tense situation. As the day progresses, the question on everyone's mind remains: will Chicago witness a peaceful expression of dissent or a descent into chaos? The protests in Chicago are not driven by a single issue, but rather a confluence of concerns that have been simmering for years. Economic inequality, a persistent problem in American society, has emerged as a major rallying cry for many activists. They point to the growing gap between the rich and the poor, the shrinking middle class, and the lack of affordable housing as evidence of a system rigged against working people.
These concerns resonate deeply in a city like Chicago, which has witnessed its own share of economic hardship and social stratification.
Reproductive rights, a fiercely debated issue in the United States, are also at the forefront of the protests. The recent overturning of Roe v. Wade has galvanized a new generation of activists determined to fight for women's right to bodily autonomy. They view the issue as a matter of fundamental human rights, a cornerstone of a just and equitable society.
The protests in Chicago reflect the growing national movement for reproductive justice, a movement that transcends political affiliations and unites people from all walks of life.
The ongoing climate crisis has added another layer of urgency to the protests. Activists are demanding bold action from the government to address climate change, which they see as an existential threat. They're calling for a rapid transition to renewable energy, investments in green infrastructure, and an end to fossil fuel subsidies. Their message is clear: the time for incremental change is over, and only a radical transformation of the economy and society can avert climate catastrophe. Among the myriad of issues fueling the protests, the recent escalation of the Israel-Hamas conflict has emerged as a focal point of anger and frustration. The images of destruction and suffering coming out of Gaza have struck a chord with many Americans, particularly those who see parallels between the current conflict and the Vietnam War. The specter of another protracted and costly military intervention in the Middle East has reignited anti-war sentiment, prompting calls for a ceasefire and a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
Chicago, home to a significant Palestinian-American community, has become a hub for protests against the Israeli government's actions in Gaza. Demonstrators, many of whom have family and friends directly affected by the conflict, are demanding an end to the violence, an end to the Israeli occupation, and a just solution that guarantees the rights and dignity of both Palestinians and Israelis.
The protests reflect the growing frustration and disillusionment with US foreign policy in the Middle East, a policy that many view as biased in favor of Israel. The focus on the Israel-Hamas conflict has injected a new level of volatility into the protests. The issue, deeply emotional and politically charged, has the potential to exacerbate existing tensions and create divisions within the Democratic Party.
While some Democrats support Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas rocket attacks, others criticize the Israeli government's use of force and its treatment of Palestinians. This internal debate within the party is playing out on the streets of Chicago, adding another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation.
As the Democratic National Convention gets underway, the city of Chicago finds itself in the national spotlight, not just as the host of a major political event, but as a crucible for the nation's anxieties and divisions. The convergence of thousands of protesters representing a diverse array of causes and ideologies has presented a formidable challenge for city officials and law enforcement agencies, tasked with ensuring the safety and security of both demonstrators and residents alike.
The city, still haunted by the specter of the 1968 Democratic National Convention, which descended into chaos and violence, has implemented a comprehensive security plan designed to prevent a repeat of that tumultuous summer.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot, facing her first major test since taking office, has assured the public that the city is prepared to handle the influx of protesters and the potential for unrest. She has emphasized the city's commitment to protecting the First Amendment rights of demonstrators while also maintaining order and ensuring the safety of all Chicagoans.
The mayor has called for peaceful and respectful demonstrations, urging protesters to make their voices heard without resorting to violence or destruction. The Chicago Police Department, bolstered by reinforcements from neighboring jurisdictions, has deployed thousands of officers throughout the city, particularly in and around the United Center, the site of the convention.
The police presence is palpable, with officers stationed on street corners patrolling the streets on foot and in vehicles, and monitoring the situation from helicopters overhead. The department has implemented a multi-layered security strategy, including the establishment of designated protest zones, the use of surveillance technology, and the deployment of specialized units trained in crowd control and de-escalation techniques.
The right to peaceful assembly and protest is a cornerstone of American democracy, enshrined in the First Amendment to the Constitution. It is a right that has been hard-won and fiercely defended throughout the nation's history, often in the face of opposition from those in power who view dissent as a threat to the established order.
The protests in Chicago, like those that have erupted across the country in recent years, serve as a reminder of the importance of this fundamental right and the ongoing struggle to ensure its protection.
However, the right to protest is not absolute, and it must be balanced against other competing interests, such as public safety, the protection of property, and the rights of others to go about their lives without undue disruption. This balancing act is a delicate one, and it often falls to law enforcement agencies to draw the line between permissible and impermissible forms of protest.
This task is made all the more challenging by the fact that protests, by their very nature, are often disruptive and confrontational. The situation in Chicago highlights the inherent tensions that arise when the right to protest intersects with the need for public order.
City officials and law enforcement agencies face the difficult task of accommodating large-scale demonstrations while also ensuring the safety and security of both protesters and residents alike. The potential for violence, whether instigated by protesters or by those opposed to their message, is a constant concern, as is the possibility of property damage and economic disruption.
As the protests in Chicago continue to unfold, they serve as a potent reminder of the vital role that dissent plays in a healthy democracy. The freedom to express one's views, even those that may be unpopular or controversial, is essential to holding those in power accountable and ensuring that the government reflects the will of the people.
The protests, while messy and sometimes disruptive, provide a platform for marginalized voices to be heard and for grievances to be aired. The right to protest is not merely a theoretical concept. It is a lived experience that has shaped the course of American history.
From the Boston Tea Party to the Civil Rights Movement to the Stonewall Uprising, protests have been instrumental in achieving social and political change. They have forced the nation to confront its shortcomings, to live up to its ideals, and to create a more just and equitable society.
The protests in Chicago, while focused on a specific event, the Democratic National Convention, reflect broader currents of unrest and dissatisfaction that are coursing through American society. They are a testament to the enduring power of collective action and the importance of making one's voice heard, even in the face of indifference or opposition.